I've always been the quiet one in my family. Not shy, just observant. The kind of kid who noticed things others didn't. Like how mom only really lit up when my older brother spoke, or how dad's expression tightened every time he had to talk business with him. I didn't mind much growing up. My name's Jaden. I'm 27 now, and I've never been interested in being the loudest person in the room. I preferred to listen, process, and act when it counted. But in a family like mine, being quiet got you labeled as weak, or worse, irrelevant. My brother, Tyler, is 3 years older than me. The golden child from day one. Star quarterback in high school, loud, charismatic, full of bravado. He could sell ice to an Eskimo, as Dad used to say. And while I was in the background building spreadsheets, systems, and quietly improving how things ran behind the scenes, Tyler was the one giving big presentations and taking all the credit. That was the dynamic. He talked. I delivered. We grew up in a business family. My grandfather started a modest logistics company back in the 70s. It grew steadily, nothing flashy, just solid, dependable work. When he passed, Dad took over and expanded it further, keeping the business family run but introducing some actual structure. Tyler, of course, was groomed early to take the reins. I wasn't even really considered. I was good with tech and processes, so I was told I'd always have a role, but leadership? Not in the cards. You don't have the voice for it, Mom once said with a shrug when I asked if Dad had ever considered me. Still, I didn't mind. At least, I told myself I didn't. I went to college, majored in business systems engineering, and when I came back home, I started working quietly behind the scenes. I built software that saved us hundreds of hours in delivery routing, automated invoicing, and even reduced our overhead by nearly 20% in the first year. But every company newsletter, every meeting, it was always Tyler's strategy or Tyler's vision. I just nodded and kept working. 2 years ago, Dad started stepping back more. He didn't say it, but we could all feel it. Fewer meetings, more fishing trips. He never officially announced a succession plan, but Tyler began acting like the company was his. He started managing people directly, me included, which was always tense. He'd shoot down my ideas in meetings, even ones he later pitched as his own. I'd confront him about it, and he'd brush it off with a grin. Just part of the game. Little bro, gotta be quicker next time. Things really shifted 6 months ago when Dad called a family meeting. Just the three of us, Mom, Tyler, and me. He said he was considering retirement. Mom clapped. Tyler smirked like he'd just been crowned, and I just sat still, waiting. Dad said he wanted to keep it in the family, and that he was thinking about splitting responsibilities, but Tyler immediately interrupted. Look, Dad, you don't have to sugarcoat it. Everyone knows I'm ready. I've been managing the teams, building client relationships. I've got the leadership skills. He gave me a sideways glance, like I wasn't even worth considering. Dad looked at me for a long moment, but didn't say much. Just nodded and ended the meeting early. That night, Tyler pulled me aside and gave me one of his infamous speeches. Listen, man, I know you do good work, but you're just not that kind of guy, you know? You're a support player. A damn good one. I'll always make sure you're taken care of. It hit harder than I expected. Not the words. I'd heard worse, but the way he genuinely believed it. Like it wasn't even a discussion. Just facts. The months that followed were rough. Tyler was officially made interim manager until Dad finalized the transition. And with that title came ego the size of a freight truck. Meetings became unbearable. He started talking over me constantly, sometimes mocking my tone when I tried to contribute. You hear that, folks? That's the whisper of innovation, he joked once during a staff huddle. A few people chuckled awkwardly. I just looked down at my notes, but my stomach burned. Then came the meeting. It was just last week. Monthly operations review. The room was full. HR, logistics leads, finance, even Dad, sitting in the back quietly. I had worked all weekend on a new warehouse optimization plan that would have saved us $80,000 a quarter. When I presented it, Tyler leaned back, arms crossed, and waited for me to finish. Then he stood up and laughed. I mean, sure, if we want to listen to spreadsheets whisper sweet nothings to us, he said, grinning. Look, I get it, Jaden's got his thing. But let's be real. He's way too quiet to ever lead anything. You're lucky I even keep you employed, bro. Dead silence. I felt the air leave the room. My ears burned. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could do was blink and clench my fists under the table. Dad didn't say a word. just looked down at the table like it didn't happen. The meeting moved on. My optimization plan was skipped. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling until 4 a.m., wondering if I was crazy. If maybe Tyler was right. If maybe I was just the quiet guy behind the scenes, always destined to be someone's footnote. But the next day, everything changed. Dad called me into his office early, before anyone else arrived. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept either. Then he handed me a set of documents and a small black box. I opened it and froze. The documents were transfer papers. The box, a master key to the entire building. I never said anything, Dad said quietly, but I've been watching. It's your time, Jaden. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Dad patted my shoulder and walked out. When I emerged into the office half an hour later, everything was different, but no one knew yet. And when Tyler walked in, loud as ever, demanding why his badge suddenly didn't unlock the executive suite, I just sat at the desk that used to be Dad's and waited. That was the beginning. If you had told me the day before that everything would flip like a coin in a storm, I would have laughed. Not because I didn't want it, but because I genuinely didn't believe it was possible. That morning, though, something inside me shifted. I'd spent my entire adult life being overlooked in my own family, especially by Tyler. And now, for the first time, I had leverage, real power. And he had no idea. I didn't announce it right away. That wasn't my style. I sat at Dad's desk, heart pounding in my chest like a drum, letting the moment settle. I reread the documents he gave me. Full transfer of operational ownership, effective immediately. There was a short clause stating, all authority and decision-making now rests solely with Jaden Mitchell. It was simple, quiet, just like me. Tyler came in late, as usual. 30 minutes past the scheduled time for our weekly leadership briefing. He made a show of rolling up his sleeves and walking in with his Starbucks cup like he was the king of the castle. You wouldn't believe the traffic today, he said, tossing his keys on the table. Then he stopped. He noticed where I was sitting. What are you doing in Dad's chair? His voice was laced with a chuckle, like it was some kind of prank. I held up the document without a word. He stared, waiting for me to explain. I didn't. I just waited, calm, the way I'd always been, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. He finally walked over, snatched the papers from my hand, and scanned them. His face changed in stages, smirk to confusion, then confusion to disbelief, then disbelief to a kind of amused outrage. This is fake, right? He asked, trying to laugh again. Is this some kind of joke? Did Dad seriously put you in charge? I didn't flinch. He did. No. Come on. This doesn't make any sense. You don't even. Look, no offense, but you're not a leader, Jaden. You've got no presence. You barely talk in meetings. People don't follow someone who blends into the wall. I stood up slowly, met his eyes, and said, that's your problem, Tyler. You think volume equals value. He opened his mouth to speak, but I walked past him and said, you're no longer in management. I'll be restructuring the team this week. The sound of his coffee cup hitting the floor behind me was louder than I expected. He didn't say another word that day, but that was just the beginning. The first 2 weeks were pure chaos. Not because I didn't know what I was doing, but because Tyler made it his mission to undermine me at every turn. He wasn't officially in a leadership role anymore, but he still had friends on the floor, people he'd taken to lunch, laughed with, partied with. At first, they didn't know what to make of the change. Everyone thought it was temporary, like I was just holding the seat warm until Tyler worked his magic and reversed everything. There were whispers, cold shoulders. People who used to thank me for fixing their systems now avoided eye contact. I'd walk into a department and conversations would stop. I told myself it was just the adjustment period, but it stung more than I expected. Still, I kept going, quietly making changes, quietly gathering information. Tyler, meanwhile, took every opportunity to test my patience. He'd walk by my office on calls, speaking loudly about how the company was better before, or how this place has no direction now. He'd corner employees at their desks, telling them I didn't understand how logistics worked, and that they should come to him if they needed anything real. And worst of all, he kept showing up to meetings uninvited. One time during a quarterly strategy session, I had just finished presenting a new cost-saving measure when Tyler waltzed in, sat down, and said, okay, let me tell you how we really used to do things. He hijacked the rest of the meeting, talking over me and ignoring the agenda. I didn't stop him. I wanted to see how far he'd go. Afterward, I called him into my office and told him calmly that this was the last time he'd do that. He rolled his eyes. What are you going to do, fire me? Dad would never let you. That's when I realized something important. Tyler still didn't believe it. He thought Dad would step in, that this was temporary, some kind of test. I decided I needed to make it real. I started cleaning house. Not publicly, just quiet changes. I began with the systems Tyler had implemented. Old, bloated, manual processes that cost us more than they saved. I had our tech team rebuild the back end with automation, increased tracking transparency, and integrated tools I'd been prototyping for months. Departments started noticing improvements. Faster scheduling, smoother payroll, real-time tracking. Morale shifted. Slowly, eyes turned toward me, not out of fear, but respect. For the first time, people were starting to see who'd been holding the company together all along. Tyler didn't take it well. A week later, I found him in the break room surrounded by a few of the warehouse guys. They all stopped talking when I walked in. He smiled at me and said, "So, boss man, you planning to replace everyone who ever disagreed with you? Or just the ones you're jealous of?" I didn't engage. I looked at the others and said, "Can you give us a moment?" They hesitated, looked at Tyler, then shuffled out. "You've got 1 week to adapt," I told him, "or you're done here." He stood up, face twisted in disbelief. "Are you serious right now? You think you can just cut me out of our company?" I stepped closer. "It's not our company anymore, Tyler. It's mine. And you're acting like a liability." That was the last real conversation we had. Because what happened next wasn't a conversation, it was war. Tyler escalated everything. He started planting rumors, saying I was planning mass layoffs, that I was selling the company, that I didn't care about the employees who built this place. He even tried to log into systems he no longer had access to. IT flagged it immediately, and I had to issue an official security audit. HR got involved. People were starting to feel the tension. Mom, of course, called me one night and demanded to know what I was doing. "You know your brother's been crying in the garage for 2 nights now?" she said like I was the villain. "You always were sensitive, Jaden, but this is too far. He's your brother." "I'm not doing anything to him," I said. "He's doing it to himself." "You're punishing him for being confident," she snapped. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm holding him accountable for being cruel." She hung up. Dad, on the other hand, stayed silent. Completely. I think he knew this was coming. He'd built the business. He'd watched us grow into it. And I think deep down, he understood Tyler's leadership was a house of cards. But the real breaking point? The moment everything truly fell apart? It came during the annual shareholders' dinner, an event we usually held at a fancy hotel downtown, catered, full of speeches and handshakes. It was the one time every year when all the big players came to see how the family was doing: investors, longtime clients, partners from neighboring cities. A big deal. This year, I was supposed to give the opening address. My first one as CEO. I had a speech prepared. Not flashy, just heartfelt. I wanted people to see that the company was in stable hands. The ballroom was packed. The lights dimmed. I walked to the podium. And then Tyler stood up at his table. He clapped slowly, loud, mocking. "Let's all give a round of applause for the quiet kid in the corner," he said, smiling. "The new visionary of the family." Laughter rippled, uneasy, confused. I stared at him. "Go ahead, little bro," he said. "Tell them how you're going to save the company with spreadsheets and awkward silences." A few people chuckled. Others looked mortified. Dad looked down. Mom looked proud. My hand trembled on the podium. But I didn't look away. I just breathed. 1 second. 2. 3. I adjusted the microphone. And that's when the real storm began. I stared at Tyler. The spotlight didn't flinch. It cast both of us in full view. Me at the podium with a folder of carefully prepared notes, and him, smirking, arms wide like he'd just delivered the punchline of a joke he was proud of. In that moment, I didn't feel angry. I felt hollow, like someone had reached into my chest and scooped everything out. All I had ever wanted was to do right by the company, to work hard and be taken seriously. And now, here I was, handpicked to lead, standing at the most important event of the year, and my own brother, in front of the people I was supposed to inspire, was turning me into a spectacle. I swallowed hard. The weight of silence in the ballroom was unbearable. The kind of silence where even the waiters stopped moving. I could have ripped into him, exposed everything. I could have told them how he mocked me in meetings, how he'd taken credit for my work, how he'd sabotaged half the progress we'd made in the past year just to preserve his ego. But I didn't. I straightened my spine, gently closed my folder, and leaned into the microphone. "I'll give my speech another time," I said, my voice steady despite the thunder in my chest. "Tonight doesn't feel right." Then I stepped away from the podium and walked straight out of the ballroom. I heard gasps, murmurs, a few awkward claps, but mostly confusion. Outside, the cold air hit me like a wall. I didn't stop walking until I reached the edge of the parking lot. My hands were shaking. I sat on the curb, loosened my tie, and stared at my shoes. For the first time in years, I felt like I had failed. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because no matter how much I accomplished, no matter what power I held on paper, I was still that quiet kid in the back of the room. To everyone who'd grown up around me, who'd formed opinions decades ago, I was still Jaden, the nice one, the tech guy, the helper, not a leader. I didn't go back inside. That night, I skipped dinner, turned off my phone, and didn't check emails. I lay in bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt empty. The next morning, I went into the office early. Earlier than usual. It was still dark out when I parked my car in the nearly empty lot and sat in silence. Engine off, keys in my hand. What was I doing? Why did I want this so badly? I thought about quitting, just walking away, selling the company or handing it back to Dad, letting Tyler take the throne he always thought was his. It would have been easy, clean, quiet, the way I always operated. But then I remembered something. It was a Thursday, cold, gray, the kind of morning that made the world feel small. And I remembered a moment from a year ago when one of the warehouse workers, Luis, had pulled me aside. He'd had an issue with his paycheck, over 100 hours missing from the system. I'd fixed it myself, stayed late with him to audit the logs and make sure every single hour he'd worked was accounted for. It was a small thing, quiet, but I remembered the look on his face when he got the corrected slip, the quiet relief, the handshake, the gratitude. That moment had stuck with me, and I realized something important. I didn't need to prove anything to Tyler. I didn't need to scream at rooms or dominate conversations or play puppet master to earn respect. I just needed to do what I'd always done. Take care of the people, build systems that worked, earn trust, not with noise, but with consistency. That morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight Tyler the way he wanted me to. I wasn't going to beat him at his game. I was going to beat him at mine. I started small. First, I sent a short apology email to the shareholders. Nothing dramatic. Just a note saying I had chosen not to speak at the dinner due to an unexpected personal conflict, and that I would be hosting a follow-up presentation at our headquarters next week to discuss the company's direction and performance. No mention of Tyler. No drama. Then I got to work. For the next few weeks, I lived in that office. Not just during the day. I was often the first to arrive and the last to leave. But I wasn't burying myself in spreadsheets or locking myself in an ivory tower. I was in the warehouse, in the delivery bays, in the break rooms. I met with the night shift staff who had never even seen an executive before. I sat with our drivers during their downtime, asking about routes and pain points. I invited every single department to book one-on-one time with me. No gatekeeping, no bureaucracy. And they came, at first cautiously, then in waves. People told me about inefficient policies Tyler had enforced, about managers who hadn't been held accountable, about broken equipment that had gone unreported because no one cared. And I listened. More than that, I acted. Within 3 weeks, I had restructured 2 departments, replaced 3 middle managers who'd been quietly abusing their power, and implemented a new suggestion system that rewarded employees for process improvements. I didn't post about it. I didn't blast it in company memos. But the shift was obvious. People smiled when they saw me. They opened up. And best of all, they started talking about me in a different way. He listens. He fixed that thing we've been complaining about for months. He's actually around. Even people who used to avoid me started asking questions, offering ideas, wanting to be involved. Meanwhile, Tyler? He grew quieter. His lunch table posse dwindled. His passive-aggressive hallway remarks stopped. I didn't fire him. Not yet. I wanted him to see it first. I wanted him to understand, fully and deeply, that leadership wasn't about being loud. It was about being effective. But the final push came from an unexpected place. Her name was Priya, our new client success manager. She'd transferred in from a partner firm and didn't know any of the family drama. She just saw me as the CEO. No history, no baggage. One afternoon, she stopped by my office with a box of files and said, "Hey, I just wanted to say, you've built something really special here." I blinked. "Thanks, but I'm still working on it." She laughed. "Aren't we all? But seriously, people trust you. That's rare. You don't command the room with charisma. You earn it with clarity." It's refreshing. That compliment hit different. Maybe because it came from someone with no skin in the family game. No biases. Just someone who saw the work and respected it. That night, I stayed late again. But not to work. To plan. Because I finally knew how this would end. Not with a fight. Not with a screaming match. But with a decision. A quiet, final one. And when it came, it would be devastating. It was funny how, once I stopped trying to be noticed and simply started doing what needed to be done, people began noticing anyway. The company began to hum like a well-oiled machine. There were fewer delays in shipments, more transparency between departments, and, most importantly, more trust. The walls Tyler had built to preserve his own little empire were slowly being dismantled, brick by brick, by the very people he used to look down on. I wasn't trying to destroy him, at least not at first, but power reveals people. And Tyler, without his title, without his inherited authority, without Dad shielding him from his own incompetence, well, he didn't know who he was anymore. That was the first crack. He started coming in later and later. Some days he wouldn't show up at all. The few times he did, he would wander the halls like a ghost in a house that no longer belonged to him, trying to assert control over conversations he was no longer a part of. But I didn't just want him out of the company. I wanted the why to be undeniable. I wanted everyone to see what I'd seen for years, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Because Tyler wasn't just a bad leader. He was dangerous in positions of influence. And if I simply forced him out without the truth surfacing, it would only leave room for revisionist history. I needed people to know why I let him go. So I started digging. Not into gossip or rumors. Into the numbers. Tyler had always bragged about his big wins from his time in charge. The investor contracts he closed, the expansion plans he spearheaded, the new vendor relationships he claimed to have secured. I'd always taken those claims at face value. Dad had too. But now, with full access, I could finally trace the lines. And what I found was messy. Deals signed without legal review. Vendor contracts with bloated fees and unexplained surcharges. Expenses marked miscellaneous that bled tens of thousands over a 2-year span. One particular vendor, Ironstream Transport, stood out. Tyler had brought them on a year before Dad stepped back. I remembered it clearly because he'd made a whole presentation about cutting-edge shipping solutions and boasted about how he negotiated a lower per-mile rate than any other logistics partner we'd ever had. Only, that wasn't true. Buried in the billing system were adjusted invoices, duplicate charges, fuel surcharges that exceeded industry norms, and even a premium client relationship fee that seemed completely fabricated. The worst part? The contract was locked in for 36 months. I cross-referenced the vendor's business license and found something that made my stomach turn. Ironstream Transport was registered under a shell company owned by Tyler's old college roommate. The same guy who once crashed on our couch for a summer and had borrowed a few grand from Tyler to get back on his feet. It all clicked. Tyler had funneled company money into a personal favor, disguising it as a business contract. It wasn't just nepotism, it was fraud. Quiet, slow, and hard to detect, but fraud nonetheless. I didn't react right away. I stared at the screen for a long time, numb. The spreadsheet sat there, glowing faintly in the darkened office, while the truth settled like a lead weight in my chest. This wasn't just about corporate strategy or differing leadership styles. Tyler had been stealing. And while I could have gone nuclear right then, called the lawyers, had him escorted out, launched a formal internal investigation, I realized that wasn't the best play. If I wanted this to stick, if I wanted the company, the board, and our family to understand the full scope of who Tyler really was, I needed to set the stage carefully. So I made a list. Everything Tyler had touched. Every department he'd manipulated. Every person he'd leaned on for influence, favors, or silence. Then I started visiting people. Quietly. One by one. I started with Mark from finance. He'd worked under Tyler during the Ironstream contract signing. A good guy, numbers first, but always hesitant to challenge authority. I invited him to lunch off-site. No suits, no laptops, just two guys with burgers and a notepad. I laid out what I'd found and watched the blood drain from his face. I always thought something was off, Mark said, running a hand through his thinning hair. But Tyler, he said the numbers were pre-approved, that your dad had already looked at them. He didn't, I said flatly. Mark sighed, sat back, and looked me in the eye. I'll help however I can. Then came HR, then legal, then logistics. I didn't reveal everything to everyone, just enough to get them to talk. And slowly, like threads unraveling a sweater, the full story began to take shape. Tyler had created a shadow system. Nothing overtly criminal on the surface, just enough plausible deniability to keep himself clean. But with the right people looking and the right documents aligned, the deception became impossible to ignore. Still, I needed more. I needed something that no one could argue with. Something public. So I reached out to Luis. Remember him? The warehouse worker I'd helped a year ago? Turns out he wasn't just respected. He was trusted. People talked to him. About everything. I asked if he'd heard anything unusual about Tyler lately. He paused, then leaned in. I heard he's been trying to poach drivers, he said. Poach? Yeah. Like, starting a new company. Or maybe a partnership. I don't know. But he's been floating the idea to a few people. Offering bonuses. Promising flexible hours. I felt my jaw tighten. He was building a fallback. That explained the increased disappearances. The meetings off-site. The tension. He was preparing to leave, but not before taking part of the company with him. I thanked Luis, then drove straight back to the office and logged into our network security portal. I had IT pull every device login, access attempt, and network activity from Tyler's account over the past 90 days. He'd been emailing confidential client lists to a private Gmail account. Not once, not twice, 14 times. And not just that, he'd attached contract templates, pricing tables, and scheduling algorithms. Our trade secrets. The next day, I looped in legal. Quietly, carefully. No alarms. No announcements. Just preparation. Because I had everything I needed now. But I wasn't going to take it to the board just yet. First, I had to talk to Dad. It had been weeks since we'd spoken beyond polite nods in passing. I knew he was watching everything unfold, but he hadn't interfered. I think he wanted to see who we'd become when left to our own devices. I invited him to lunch at the old diner near the truck depot, the same one he used to take us to when we were kids. I even got the same booth. He showed up wearing his faded baseball cap and an old company windbreaker, the one with our original logo stitched into the chest. He looked tired, but alert. We didn't make small talk. I slid the folder across the table. He flipped it open, scanned the pages, and didn't say a word for almost 5 minutes. Then he closed it, set his hands on the table, and looked at me. You ready for what comes next? I nodded. Not revenge, he said. Justice. I know. He exhaled. Then it's time. I looked down at my coffee, then back at him. You're not surprised. He shook his head. I was hoping I was wrong. But I saw it years ago. I just didn't want to believe it. Why didn't you stop it? Because I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd grow out of it. That the weight of the company would humble him. Make him better. Didn't work. No, he said quietly. It didn't. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. The next morning, I scheduled a full executive board meeting. Mandatory attendance. I printed every document, every email, every vendor record, every client leak. I put them in black binders with Tyler's name on the cover. And I saved one special envelope for last. Sealed. Labeled. Final decision. CEO action required. Because this wasn't just going to be a termination. It was going to be an unmasking. And when the meeting came, when Tyler sat down and saw the binder with his name on it, when he opened it and realized what I knew, his face turned a shade I'd never seen before. And I hadn't even spoken yet. Tyler walked into the boardroom late, as usual. He didn't bother hiding it anymore. His disregard for professionalism, his sense of entitlement. But this time, the swagger had an edge of unease. Maybe it was the silence in the room, or the way every executive already had a black binder in front of them, each one identical, labeled plainly with one word, Tyler. He didn't notice the sealed envelope at the center of the table at first. He slid into the last open seat, across from me, and gave a half-hearted grin. What's all this? He asked, eyes flitting around the room. We doing surprise performance reviews? Nobody laughed. Not this time. I didn't speak right away. I let the room settle. The boardroom had changed since I took over. It used to be cold, clinical. Now it was warmer. Plants. Better lighting. A whiteboard filled with input from every department. The kind of environment I'd spent months building to encourage openness, trust, and collaboration. But this wasn't a collaboration. This was a reckoning. I stood slowly and took a breath. I've gathered everyone here today to present the findings of a formal internal audit. I began. All information has been verified, cross-checked, and reviewed by legal. You'll find the supporting evidence in the binder in front of you. Tyler opened his binder, and the color drained from his face. It started with the vendor contracts, pages of financial inconsistencies. Then came the emails, personal communications between him and the owner of Ironstream Transport, clearly colluding on inflated rates and fabricated surcharges. Then screenshots of his unauthorized access attempts, the client lists he sent to his personal email, and finally, testimonies from employees who'd been approached about new opportunities with him. I said nothing. Let the evidence speak first. Tyler flipped pages faster now, frantically scanning, shaking his head. This is out of context, he muttered. This is ridiculous. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Is there anything in there that's false? I asked calmly. He froze. You didn't even ask me for my side. You blindsided me. I didn't move. I'm giving you your side now. Say what you need to say. He looked around the room, desperate for a lifeline. Come on, you guys know me. This is a witch hunt. Jaden's just bitter because I gave him tough love. He's twisting things. Nobody responded. Not one person. Even the ones who had laughed at his jokes months ago now stared at him like they didn't know who he was anymore. He turned to Dad. You're really going to let this happen? Dad didn't blink. I should have let it happen years ago. Tyler slammed the binder shut, shoved it away, and stood. This is a joke. I built this company. You all think Jaden made it work? Please. I carried it for years. This is sabotage. No, I said, stepping forward. This is accountability. Then I picked up the sealed envelope from the center of the table and placed it gently in front of him. He stared at it like it was a bomb. This is your formal termination, I said, along with a detailed summary of every policy and legal clause you violated. Legal has already prepared the necessary filings. You'll also find a non-compete clause, which you triggered by poaching drivers and sharing proprietary data, and a cease and desist order. His hand hovered above the envelope but didn't touch it. You're being escorted out immediately after this meeting, I added. Your access has already been revoked. Silence. Tyler's mouth opened, then closed again. Then he laughed, a short, dry, bitter thing. You think this is over? He said. You really think this is how it ends? You're nothing without me. You wouldn't last a month if I wasn't here cleaning up your last paycheck was processed yesterday, I said. And for what it's worth, you were never cleaning up anything. You were the mess. That hit. His shoulders dropped. His hands clenched at his sides. But there was nothing left to say. Security was waiting outside the door. I gave them a nod. He tried one last time to appeal to someone, anyone, with a desperate look as he was let out. But no one met his eyes. And then he was gone. Just like that. The fallout wasn't small. There were press inquiries, murmurs from the board, and a few clients who needed reassurances. I spent the next few weeks clarifying the situation, with transparency, not spin. I gave full disclosure to our partners. Sent personal emails to every employee explaining the breach of trust, the steps we were taking to protect the company, and my commitment to keeping things honest moving forward. The surprising part? People respected it. The truth. No fluff. Just accountability. Employee morale skyrocketed. Teams that used to operate in silos began collaborating more openly. We began to rebuild, slowly, but deliberately. I didn't do it alone. I promoted people who had been overlooked for years, gave managers with real empathy and vision the space to lead. I hired a new compliance officer, rewrote internal policy to prevent anything like this from happening again. And for the first time in the company's history, we weren't just family-run. We were team-led. As for Tyler, he spiraled. I heard rumors that he tried to start his own company but couldn't get the funding, that Ironstream collapsed after we severed the contract, that he went to Mom asking her to intervene, but she refused to get involved anymore. She still sends me the occasional guilt-laced text. He's your brother, Jaden. Family is family, but she knows better than to ask me to reverse anything. And then came the voicemail. It was late. I'd just finished a long call with our warehouse expansion team when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I hit play. His voice was quieter than I remembered. Hesitant. Weighed down. Hey, it's me. Look, I know I messed up. I was stupid. I was angry. I wasn't thinking straight. I miss it, man. The company. The people. Everything. I don't know what to do anymore. Can we talk? I deleted it. Not because I hated him. Because I finally didn't need his validation. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing in anyone's shadow. I was standing on solid ground. Ground I built myself. The next company meeting was different. No drama. No spectacle. Just a packed room. Full of people who had stayed, fought through the changes, and helped build something better. I stood at the front. Not with a binder, not with an agenda, but with a whiteboard and a single sentence written across the top. What does real leadership look like? And as the room filled with ideas, laughter, and a surprising number of post-it notes, I realized something. Revenge didn't have to be loud. It didn't have to be cruel. It just had to be true. And mine was. Tyler was wrong about a lot of things. But mostly, he was wrong about this. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to be heard when it matters. And now, I finally was.